Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of the band Maroon 5, but I'm now a registered therapist, author, speaker, coach, and a mental health advocate. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maylard. How you doing, Duck?
I'm good, buddy. Did you slip in another title in there? Was there speaker and coach? Is that new?
I'm trying it on. Yeah. I'm trying it on for size.
I like
speaker
it.
Coach.
I like it. I said it makes you feel even more important.
Well, that's the goal, right? That's what we're trying to accomplish
here.
Important,
right? Yeah.
So you've been in the midst of some exciting stuff. You're working on production.
I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking, we record these obviously in order, but we don't always upload them in order, and people always don't listen to them in order. So there's a real possibility that people could be listening to episodes where I finished the show already, or episodes where I haven't even talked about the show. So it might be a little out of order, and I hope that doesn't confuse listeners. But yes, I'm neck deep in rehearsals for the musical that I'm doing. It's been a little overwhelming, but in a good way, sort of in a being thrown into the deep end. I'm doing a show with about 12 other actors, most of whom have done this show multiple times. And it's a show where the actors are the musicians. So we're all playing instruments. And so, normally when you learn a new musical, you've got to learn the music and your lines. Well, I've got to learn the music, the lyrics, and I've got to learn all the guitar parts. And I'm switching to, cajon. And so it's three other things on top of what I normally have to do, which I haven't done for 25 years, as we've talked about. So there are parts that can be a little overwhelming, but I've got a great group around me who are like carrying me on the places where I'm a little squirrely.
So on top of that, though, you're also now 47 years old, right? Yeah. And you've got a kid and you've got a life at home that's very different than it was when the last time you were doing production, right?
Yeah, you just segued. You didn't even know you segued. Literally last night, my wife and I had a dumb fight about, the kind of the way that this is affecting our lives, not in a negative way, just in a different way. I've been here in this house, always available, always around for 10 years since my son was born. Like, I'd never had a 9-to-5 job. I was never the dad that was like, sorry, dad's not going to be home till 7. I was always here. And now my wife is home right now while I'm off doing these rehearsals. And it's just a role change for both of us. And I'm sure, my wife certainly says there's no resentment, but I'm sure there's sort of just that feeling of like, where's Brian? Why isn't he normally here to do these things? And I'm probably doing the same thing. Like, when I come home and I go, well, why do I have to make dinner? You know what I mean? And so we had a dumb argument last night about like I wanted to invite the cast over on Labor Day because we don't have rehearsal that day, and a lot of the people are from out of town. And, she doesn't enjoy having people at the house as much as I do. And it's like, it made me start to think about the difference in, people say, I love you because we hate the same things. We both binge watch shows and hate watch them, or we but it's tough when there's a divergence in that, like this, for example, where I'm like, I'm social and I want to invite people into my world. And, and she's like, no, I'm good. And I feel like, I don't always know what the right way to deal with that is. Do I go, no, this is something I want, so I'm going to push for it? Or do I go, okay, I share this home with you. We're 50-50 partners here. I'll acquiesce to your desire to not have people invade your space. You know what I mean? It's a tough line to walk sometimes.
It is. And I think that, if one party or both parties are acquiescing all the time, then it's going to be a problem because you're constantly burying something that is a need or a desire, and you're never getting that fulfilled. So I don't think it's an all or nothing proposition where you have to acquiesce to what her way of living would be ideally, or she has to acquiesce to yours. I think there's probably a balance that can be struck, but there's a lot of communication that's required to strike that balance. It's like, maybe it has to be clear what the boundaries are in terms of when that's appropriate, when it's okay, and when it's not. If she needs, enough fair warning in terms of.
Well, I figured a week. I gave her a week, but it's also it's that on top of the role reversal that we're going through right now with her kind of being home and her having to take him to the orthodontist and the things that like I usually just kind of handle that stuff because she's usually out working and so now it's like
Mr. Mom.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Mom and I love it and I've loved it for 10 years, but we have discussed the possibility of a reality where, in the 10 years since my son was born, I mean, I've been in this business for 25 years, and in all the years I've worked here in LA, 90% of my jobs have been in LA. In the last 5 years, I've traveled to Canada to shoot a show. I've traveled to Texas to shoot a movie. I'm doing this, out of town. It's like all of a sudden I'm starting to have jobs that are going to take me away for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, things like that. And I want that to be okay, but I also am a human, and I'm aware of the burden that puts on somebody to thrust them into a new role. It's one thing for me to be like, hey, I get to go to Canada and shoot and be treated like a movie star, and it's great. For her, it's like all the normal parts of her life, just without the support of me being there. And so now she's taking on double duty, and I'm taking on 50% of it. You know what I mean? So I understand asking, hey, let's have people over on top of that new burden is probably what made us have a dumb fight last night, So I'm aware of that. I'm not oblivious to the fact that, like, hey, what's the problem? It's all good. Let's have people over. Like, I understand that she's struggling with the change in role too.
Well, the great news is that we have the perfect guest on today's episode for you to ask some questions about maybe parenting, co-parenting, how you guys are going to navigate this situation. She's not a couples therapist, but she is a parenting coach.
Well, there's sorry to interrupt you, but there are issues that have come up with my son as well. He's known nothing but me being here all the time, and I'm sure there is a little bit of that, like, where's Dad? Like, Dad's always here. He's just leaving us? Like, I'm sure there's some resentment, there's some hurt, and there's some injury that I definitely do not want to let get out of hand. So I'm happy to talk to Destini today about that and get some advice.
Yeah. So Destini Ann Davis, I've been, studying up on her for this conversation. And I have to say, I'm very impressed with everything that she's doing. I think she's a really interesting and just a helpful force to be out in the community, kind of spreading the kind of work that she's doing as a certified parenting coach. She's an author. She has a TED Talk on parenting, and she's taking an approach I think that other people have taken and has become a bit more popular of late, but she does it in a way that's kind of fun and engaging. She has like 1 million followers on TikTok because the videos she makes about parenting are so just kind of catchy and fun, as well as really informative. So I think that it's great when you can kind of straddle those worlds and be both relevant in that influencer kind of way that people want to pay attention to what it is that you're posting, but actually be able to back it up with substance of things that are really helpful. And so I see a lot of crossover, and I see her kind of dispelling some of the myths about different styles of parenting that I want to get into with her. But I also see, we talk a lot on this show, you and I'm not a parent, and you are, and you come in, to some of these intros looking for some therapy or just support or advice.
It's a recurring theme.
Yeah. But I'm a therapist, and I, obviously have some good advice, but this is something she does every day. And it's funny though, because your Mr. Mom, she works with moms, I think pretty much is the norm. I don't know exclusively, but to kind of a little twist on that, I think to have a dad and a guy who has decided not to have kids, but as a therapist works with people who have kids all the time, it should be an interesting, just little group of perspectives together today.
Yeah, it's funny. We want to believe that we have evolved as a society to a place where the stay-at-home dad isn't an anomaly, but it still is to an extent. I mean, I was the dad at preschool with all the moms. Like I'd pick them up and we'd stay after and we'd play, and it was me and 6 moms. And it was great. I loved it. I've talked about it before on this show that I can hang with anybody. I'll have a conversation about anything. It doesn't bug me if people are kind of annoying. I think it's cool, But it definitely has still been a thing that's like, the moms are kind of the ones who deal with the family issues. And so for me to be the dad who's sort of the one that's like, well, I'm here for pickup. I'm here to try to work out these dynamics. I don't think that the rules change for moms or dads. I just think it's sort of an industry standard, that still is a little bit one-sided. That's all.
Yeah. And as we speak, Mr. Mom is turning back into Beetlejuice. So the time
I've had a tendency to turn into Beetlejuice sometimes when my son pushes me over the edge. Yeah. I can be a bit of a demon.
For those of you who are too young to know the reference, Michael Keaton being the actor who was both Beetlejuice and Mr. Mom.
It was showtime. Yeah.
So, is there anything else that you want to talk about before?
No, I'm excited. I think we should jump in because, like I said, I got questions that need answers before I strangle my kids sometimes. You know?
Yeah, I figured that would be the case. It's good, and I like when you become the centerpiece of the episode.
Oh, me
sometimes.
too. I like it too.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you've known this, but I'm a bit of a show off.
So here's your big break. Here's your opportunity to have
all my questions answered.
Yeah. So without further ado, our conversation with Destini Ann Davis here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Destini Ann Davis, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast.
I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to have a conversation with you all. You are just two very dynamic individuals, and so I'm very honored and blessed to be here.
Well, the honor is ours. I was just saying in the intro, I'm really impressed by a lot of the things that I'm seeing you talking about and the way that you're talking about it. And it seems like you're really engaging a community in a really helpful way. So congratulations on all your great work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, the community that I serve just reminds me of like the good in humanity. And so I'm really grateful to be able to have a good experience online with humans. But that's not the case for everybody.
Well, no, and parenting specifically, because as a parent, we'll get into it a lot, but my wife and I have always been a part of, parenting message boards and groups, and there can be toxicity in the world of like, well, when my dear daughter does this, we just praise her, and well, that works for you, it doesn't work for me,
Right.
So I'm glad you found
sure.
a space where everyone seems to be positive and uplifting.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is like to show up authentically, and I'm always like, I'm not going to find my people just any sort of relationship if I'm not being myself. And so I think that leading by being honest and vulnerable and authentic has allowed me to attract parents that are very similar in that regard.
So in the spirit of that, I'll be honest and vulnerable and be just kind of put my cards on the table so you know who you're talking to today. So I'm not a parent. I've chosen not to have kids. And as a therapist, I've also chosen not to work with kids. I think the youngest that I'll go
because
is
they're monsters.
Exactly.
That's the reason. Protect your peace. No, yeah.
No, but essentially I've kind of eliminated the chance of having like deep connections with children in my life for both of those reasons. However, I do work with a lot of adults that are parents, and I see a lot of the things coming up in my conversations with them that the things that you're talking about really resonate with. And so I'm curious, because what I love about what you're talking about is, we've spent so much time focusing on tools for parenting, trying to change the behavior of the child, or what's wrong with the child. How are we going to fix this child that's a problem? And you're talking about how it starts with the parent healing the issues that are going on for them, resolving the issues that are going on for them, looking inward first before you start thinking about how you have to change the child. So I see a lot of crossover between the work that I'm doing and the work that you're doing. I'm curious, for you, working with parents of children, I think it's the problem that we run into sometimes is that they feel like they're being blamed, right? The finger is being pointed at them. And so there's always that thing for me as a therapist, like, how do I approach this with, let's shift the focus onto you as the parent in a way that is empowering as opposed to blaming or judging.
Yeah, for sure. That is the word that I was going to go to. And it is very much empowering. And typically clients come to me when they've already had the self-awareness piece. And so they've had like that awakening where they're like, oh my God, yes, I am a huge part of the environment. Like I need to be responsible. So I'm not typically putting that mirror up for them, maybe in the way that you would as a therapist. They're typically coming to me once they're like, okay, I need to figure this out, and I'm helping them with the tools and the support aspect of it. But it is very true. A lot of it needs to be parent centric. My daughter, my oldest, she's in therapy, and I recognize like the role that I play in certain areas and aspects of her life. And I think that it's important for parents to recognize that when it comes to empowerment, when you have an understanding of what the issues are, when you're focusing on it as these are things that I needed, like that's how I talk to them. Like, these are actually things that you need. Like, take your child out of it for a second. It's very hard for us to do, but take your child out of it for a second. Like, these deficits that are impacting your child are also impacting you. Like, before you even had your kid, they amplify these issues. But before you even had your child, there were points and places in your well-being that could have been improved, that would have made you feel better, that would have allowed you to have better relationships and better interactions. And so when I say parent focused, I'm not like parent focused so that your child can have a better life. I'm like, it's about you right now. And it probably wasn't about you. And making it about you in a healthy way is just naturally going to support the parent-child relationship. So that's how I try to see it in terms of empowerment. It's like, it's not a problem you need to fix. There are needs and desires and beliefs that deserve to come to the root for you as a person.
So I know that this is a deeply personal thing for you. This is something you came to because you felt like you were struggling as a parent and you were seeking out help. Tell us a little bit about your journey in that regard, how you made that shift and how that came about.
Well, I was like Doug, like I was on all of the blogs and the forums and very much getting this messaging of like perfect parenting and Pinterest mom at a time where I was going through grief. So you have this model that literally goes against what your mental and emotional capacity is able to do. And I have a child in front of me that I'm not parenting well. I am very much in the permissive space. There's regular permissive and then there's like neglectful permissive. And in some areas I was in the neglectful permissive space of I don't have the capacity for your emotions, so I'm just going to give in. But also I don't have the capacity for discipline. So I'm in bed at 6 p.m. grieving. Who knows what you're doing at 5, right? And so that was the balance that I was in. And so for me, recognizing this isn't working, the first entryway to that was, how do I be a better parent? How do I get her to listen to me? Like, I'm pulling all of my psychology background and behaviorist stuff and like, okay, we're going to do the rewards and the charts and all of this to change her behavior. And it's like, the shift was you and your needs not being met and you not being supportive and you not being able to support yourself. And when I recognized that, that is when things change. Like, okay, grief, mental health, these type of things, my ADHD, these are the difference between helpful and harmful parenting. It has nothing to do with the behaviors and the systems. Those things are great, but there are things internally going on that if I do not check for me, it doesn't matter what tool I have, it's going to be implemented inappropriately for my child.
This is a chance for me to jump in because I wholeheartedly agree with the like, you have to check in with yourself every step of the way. And for me, it started early. I have a 10-year-old son who, disclaimer, the things that I will talk to you about are like, they're little concerns. He's a great kid. Like, he's an A student. He plays baseball. He does musical theater. He's great. It's like the things that bother me are just like, he wants to play another 10 minutes of video games. Like, it's normal stuff. But I remember very early on, my wife went back to work 6 weeks after my son was born. And I was the stay-at-home dad willingly. And, I wanted to do it. But, immediately I was hit with the barrage of, isn't this beautiful? It's the most beautiful time in your life. And I was like, no, this sucks. Like, this is terrible. I love my son. I love my wife, but I'm tired. He cries. He poops. And just that first acknowledgement of like, it doesn't have to be an Ann Geddes poster. It's not always beautiful. It can be terrible and wonderful at the same time. Just allowing myself that first bit of grace of like, I don't have to pretend this is wonderful. I don't have to live up to some standard of, the 2-month-old is perfect. It's wonderful. Like, no, it's terrible. You're up at 4 a.m. Just that, giving myself that permission initially, I think set a tone for the rest of his childhood where I could say, no, this part stinks, but it's got to get done. This part is wonderful, so I can definitely acknowledge it and contrast it with the horrible parts. I think it just gave me a more realistic perspective and approach to parenting. I still made a bunch of mistakes that I probably could have done better, but I certainly didn't fall into that initial trap of my little angel is perfect and anything he wants to do is right. And I, permit, like you say, that permissive space. So at least initially, I agreed with that sentiment of like allowing yourself the space to acknowledge what is and isn't feeling wonderful in the moment,
Well, that's the human experience. And
Yeah.
to your point, you being able to do that for yourself, I'd imagine makes it easier to be able to do it with your child. And I see it very often. My child therapist talks about it very often, that the common thing that comes up is this like word of disrespect and this idea of disrespect. And I think that so many parents are just having a mismatch in terms of what behaviors are appropriate, not even just for a child, but for a human. And so for you to be able, as a fully functioning adult, to be able to say, no, actually, this is really difficult. I'm having a hard time. I don't know why y'all think that this is supposed to be the most beautiful thing in the world. For you to be able to acknowledge that within yourself and not go into any sort of distorted thinking transfers onto your child when he's dealing with conflict, when y'all are dealing with conflict, when he's dealing with internal conflict, like that compass. But again, that had nothing to do with parenting. That was just your internal framework.
Yeah.
That's you. That wasn't you as a parent. That was just Doug as a person. And so I think that is why I'm constantly like trying to just love on parents as people, because when we feel better, every area of our life is changed. And I think that the parent-child relationship is no different. And they show up differently towards us as well.
Now, I want to back up just for a second because, on this show, we try to make it for the layperson, right? So that some of the psychological terms and things can go over people's heads. And I want to make sure that we're defining a couple of things clearly and give you a chance to speak on them. When we talk about permissive parenting versus authoritarian parenting, that was something I hadn't heard those terms until I was in grad school. So I think in terms of permissive parenting, it's the kind of laissez-faire approach that we've seen in some of the younger generations in reaction to the older, very hardcore authoritarian disciplinarian. Right. So I feel like it's been set up, this paradigm between those are the only two options. You're either strict and you provide structure and discipline, or you're their best friend and you just give them lots of love and let them do whatever they want. As if those are, those two binary extremes are the only way to parent. And it sounds to me like you're offering a third option, which is sort of a balance point between the two, or a sort of best of both worlds sort of approach. Is that accurate?
I think it's more so about parenting the child that's in front of you. And that is the most important part, because there will be things that I will do maybe in my home that someone would be like, that's like authoritarian, or like you only gave her two options, and that's like the illusion of choice, right? And then in someone else's household, like two options may be too much. A child, asking them to make even a decision at that point may be too much. So I think that it's really about parenting the child that's in front of you, parenting in alignment with your values, and just honoring who your child is as an individual, as a person. And so fitting into these boxes and these constructs makes it very difficult for you to do that. And I think oftentimes we're like, the pendulum is swinging where, well, I identified my mom as authoritarian, and so I'm going to do the complete opposite. And I always tell my clients, like, your kids don't need what you didn't have as a kid. Like, stop saying that. Your kid is not you. Your kid has a different parent than you. And you're going to come up against so many blocks if you're like, I'm just going to give my kids what I didn't have. You need to be willing to do deep work in understanding who your child is every single day, every single transition, so that you can give them what they need, because they're not little you. Like, they're you. Give little you what little you needs, but also focus on who the parent or the child you're actually parenting.
And it's funny too, because I feel like a lot of times those roles, that binary, permissive versus authoritarian, was often represented in our generation from our two parents. One was the disciplinarian and one was the best friend. And my mom was the disciplinarian. My dad was the fun, loving guy, and we loved my dad and we feared my mom, which wasn't fair to her. My dad was a child in an adult's body, and she had to do all the heavy lifting, And so I think I fall victim to that too, of wanting to be like, well, I'm not going to be like my dad, but I'm also not going to be as harsh and cruel as my mom. I'm going to, not cruel. Sorry, Sandy, you weren't cruel. I know now that you were just doing your best. But you know what I mean? Like, there is that tendency to be like, well, I'm just going to do what I felt was, I wish my parents had done. And it's really an interesting point that you say, you don't have to give your kids what you didn't have, because they're having an entirely different experience. They have different parents, and they're not going through the same deficiencies that you did.
Well, that's interesting. And I don't know if we have time to talk about this, but it kind of just made me think about, like, it made me think about the fact that, like, Yeah, I had that as well. I had that dichotomy in my
Hmm.
parents. And maybe in this generation, as individuals, parents are trying to not be one or the other, but are trying to be both. And so I'm wondering if that is, if you are seeing that, even as a therapist of adults, if that's something that you're seeing that is common, that that's typically the case, that older generations typically, this was your role in parenting and
Right.
this is my role in parenting, because I see it very
And
differently
now we're
now
both
in
kind of
parents.
coming to the center.
Good cop, bad cop, right? That was the way the dynamic worked. And I think that because of that, because people had some traumatic experiences with that kind of discipline that could verge on cruelty or just sort of diminishing or judging, the pendulum swung all the way to the opposite extreme. And I see a lot of voices out there, kind of, and they're not wrong, but arguing that we need more of a swing back the other direction in terms of offering more structure, offering more guidance. The only argument I would make is that we don't have to swing all the way back
All the way back.
to the where it was in the 1940s. Like, we can find a middle ground. And I love the fact that you talk about parenting the child that's in front of you, because every person is unique and their needs are unique. In your case, though, it sounds, the way that you talk about your parents, you talk about your mom as being more permissive, your dad being more authoritarian, but you were running into some of the same issues that your mom ran into as a parent, as a young parent yourself, and then seeing it sounds like some of the same issues in your child that you were having. Is that accurate?
Yeah, for sure. My mom definitely worked a lot more, and so her permissiveness was because of that. It was just like overworked, tired, can't, like, just didn't have the energy to do certain things. And so she was very much like Olivia Pope, hardcore, like during the day. But when she came home, it was just like, I'm just like tired. So whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's be friends. Let's be cool. And so I think that I lacked boundaries. I lacked discipline myself. And losing her and going through that, I kind of mimicked that same thing. She was the parent that I liked. So in my mind, I'm like, that's good parenting. Like, I liked her, so I want to do the same thing. And then I didn't realize and recognize kind of some of the deficits that I developed because of more of that permissive style. But even to that point, though, I think that she was not neglectful at all in compassion
Mm.
and in empathy and in understanding. Like, I felt understood. And there's so many amazing things that I took from my experience with my mom. And I just want to be her, but with support. Like I say that, I think I said that earlier, that there's a self-awareness element, a tools element, and then there's a support element. And I think that she had the self-awareness and I think she had the tools, but she just did not have the support to be able to implement. And so that's kind of what has been important in my journey, is creating support networks, support systems to be able to parent in alignment with my values that I believe are similar to my mom's.
So you lost your mom like right around the time that you had a child? Was that the timeline, or how?
No, so she was 5. She was
She was
5
5.
when my mom passed. Yeah, but my mom was very active, very involved. I was a teen mom, so I always say like I had a kid at 19, but I kind of became a mom at like 25, 26 when my mom passed. So it was definitely a different dynamic, a lot of codependent dynamics, which basically just meant that my mom was my world. She did everything for me. I didn't really think for myself. Like, it was a very enmeshed relationship and a very supportive relationship. Like, it was easy to be and exist because I had her. And so when she passed away, it was like my whole world is flipped upside down. And like, I have a kid. Like, I really have a kid now. I didn't have a kid before. I really have a child now and have to navigate parenting. And so my experience was different in that way because that's not most people's typical dynamic.
It sounds like your relationship with your mom was similar to my relationship with my dad, who,
Really?
yeah, we just had him on the show actually recently. He was a guest, and it was interesting. I mean, it was conversations that we've had because I'm 46 now, but when I was, 19, 20, my relationship with him was very similar to what you're describing, and the codependency and the enmeshment, and that's something we've had to work through. And it's been interesting for me, being at the age I'm at and my parents being in their late 70s now, the dynamic shift that happens at that stage of life, where all of a sudden they're coming to me for help and I'm having to like figure out where the boundaries are on the other end in terms of like, it was, don't help me so much because I need to be my own person when I was a young adult. And now it's how much do I help my parents who are starting to need my help more? Maybe a different topic than what you covered, but it's just interesting how the relationship can evolve over time. It sounds like your relationship with your mom was starting to evolve as you were evolving, and then you had this, and then you lost her. Was it all of a sudden that she passed away, or was it something?
Yeah. So to your point, it was exactly like it was exactly that my relationship with her was evolving. I was becoming more of my own self, and she passed very suddenly. She had a stroke out of nowhere. She was 48, and she had a stroke during like a routine surgery. She had back issues for a while, and she was just going back in to get back surgery. And she had a stroke during her recovery process. And so it was very shocking because she had had so many surgeries. So it was just like, oh, okay, just another surgery. And so we weren't expecting it. She wasn't sick or anything like that, but she really was like the rock, the glue, the person that held everything together. And so my support system kind of just crumbled all at one time. But what it really did for me was, now that I do this work, it really gives me an empathy for parents. And I think that's why like my community doesn't look like these message boards, because I'm like, I don't care what tools you have. If you don't have support, or if systemically you don't have support, or you're in survival mode, none of that matters. Like, there are just different dynamics and circumstances for parents that make parenting significantly more challenging and more difficult. And you can have it one day and then the next day not have it. And so how do we meet parents where they are and stop the blaming and empower them the same way we should be doing with our kids?
A lot of times it's just the logistics of parenthood that create those stressors.
It is for me with ADHD.
Yeah. My wife and I live out here in California, and my family is back in New Jersey and on the East Coast. Her family is in New York, and we raised our son basically alone. We never had drop him off at grandma's for the weekend and take some time. We never had, hey, can grandma pick him up from school? Because it's always been juggling our lives and our schedules with his. And it's also been a little bit of like, we're just this unit of three. And sometimes I'm sad for my son being an only child without extended family. You know, if there are times when his friends from school are not around, it's just us. And it's like, I feel bad that he doesn't have this community that's around him, you know? And so I think, like you say, that it's unique to every family, that we have issues that aren't about his upbringing or his emotional state or anything like that. It's just literally like, who's going to pick him up from baseball practice? Who's going to help him with his homework because I'm at work and my wife is bad at math? You know, things like that create additional levels of stress in a child and an upbringing that are just logistics. They have nothing to do with our choices or our mental health, you know? And so there's a lot more involved than just, is my kid a bad kid, or did I raise him wrong? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but your value system is going to dictate how you see those things and how you see those challenges and how you respond to them. And so I think that's really important. A lot of times, regardless of what paradigm a parent is fitting into, it's them not living in accordance with their values that creates a huge difference in what the environment feels like for a child. And so it sounds like, for your situation, yes, logistically it's challenging, but on the day-to-day basis, it seems like you are living in accordance with your values. There's not like this dissonance here where you're trying to do or be something that you're not.
Right. The priorities are always, well, you know, we've got to get him to his musical theater because he loves that, or I'm going to help him with his homework even if I'm going to be late for this, you know, things like that. The problem is when it all works until it doesn't, you know, especially like you say, living according to your values. So if you have an approach towards parenting that, you know, my wife and I do, we want to nurture and we want to let him figure things out for himself. But when we come to a point where either he's pushed a boundary too far and we have to suddenly do something that we said we didn't want to do, whether it's, you know, lose our minds and scream at him, or whether it's take away something that is really precious to him because it's the only thing we can think of that's going to motivate him. And it feels it feels like it is untrue. It feels like, well, this isn't what we agreed upon. This isn't how we wanted to do it. You know, there are times when I guess it's not obvious. We don't spank our kid. We never spanked our kid, but I was grown up spanked. And there are times where I go, I get it. I get when my mom was like, you know what? Wow, you know, and that's a line that obviously I have not wanted to cross. But like I said, the difficulty arises when you do reach the end of all the tools that you think you have and you're still not getting the result that you want. And you're like, what do I have left other than I'm taking away video games, which it doesn't feel substantial or substantive. It just feels punitive. And it just feels like he's just going to be sad and angry. He's not going to understand, you know, what he did that is motivating this and what he can do to fix it in the future. He just wants to avoid losing video games. And that's not learning. That's not growth, you know?
Yeah, not long term for sure. First of all, I just want to say that I am dreaming of the world where it is obvious. Like, obviously I don't hit my kids. I can't wait for that.
I would hope it's obvious.
It's right. But it's not. The second piece of that is there's like this, Daniel Siegel has a really good model for this in terms of like survive moments and thrive moments. And being a whole parent and a whole person is being able to accept that the goal is the thrive moments.
Right.
When we're in alignment, we feel good. Those are the moments. And it is impossible to get through this without survive moments because you have one kid. So all of his firsts are your first.
Yeah.
Like the first time he lies to you is going to be the first time you've been lied to by your child, by the person that you're supporting, you know? So you're not going to be able to know exactly what to do. This is my life's work. And there have been plenty of moments where I'm just like, you know, we're a team. I don't have the answers. Give me the phone. We're going to figure this out because what you just did is not safe. And it's my job. That's my number one job, to keep you safe. And until I figure this out, until I have more information, until we can sit down and collaborate on this, this is the thing. This is what's happening. Like at the end of the day, that was a survive moment, but I know that is just a part of the journey. And I know that I have a bank of goodwill, if you would call it, where it's like that balances it out because on a regular day-to-day basis, this is how mom showed up. If you're living in accordance to your values the majority of the time, that's a great difference than
being all over the place where the kid doesn't know what's coming or how to. Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't necessarily know the statistics on this. I can't speak on it, but just from my critical thinking perspective, a child who is in maybe a more authoritarian environment, but their parent is living in accordance to their values, not abusive, but just like it is what it is, versus a child whose parent is very dysregulated, whose parent is not living in accordance with their values, is not happy and healthy themselves, doesn't have community, is going to fare better than the opposite, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I think that if you had to choose, I mean, the lowest on the scale in terms of parenting, even more so than authoritarian, is what we'd call a disorganized attachment. You can't even predict what the outcome's going to be. And it's like, so then you don't know, as a kid, you're trying to like figure out, how do I navigate this? I did this one way and it got a certain reaction. And then I did it again and it got a different reaction, or the parent was predictable one day and then unpredictable the next day. That could be devastating to your sense of safety in the world and emotional safety in relationships. And that you kind of carry with you into later relationships. So for me, this is so important, not just because we want to have, kids that are doing well and that are not misbehaving, but because we're raising a generation of people that are going to go out in the world. And you see so much of this of people that are just basically reacting to things from a place of trauma and not engaging in a way that is, mature and healthy. And so I see the relationship, a lot of what you're talking about between the parent and child, as very similar to a lot of things we talk about as adult relationships, really. It's just about like, how do you approach someone with respect? How are you clear in your communication and your boundaries in a way that the other person knows what they're getting from you? They know what to expect. They know what the expectations are. And you can show up, both of you can show up in a respectful way and grow greater intimacy. That's kind of the model for couples therapy as much as it is for, I haven't heard it as much for parenting, but it sounds like that's the shift that you're talking about, is if we're going to treat an adult in that way and offer them that kind of respect, and that's the goal, why wouldn't we do that for our kid from day one?
Well, I think, yeah, for sure. I think that the big difference and what makes it difficult is that there is a certain level of dependency that a child has. And so there's just this like inherent almost feeling of entitlement over a child's behavior because of it has a significantly greater impact on you and your life than maybe someone else's, than another adult would. And so that is the challenge that a lot of my clients and people in my community come up against. It's like, I want to treat them this way, but they have so much influence over every aspect and element of my life. And I don't think that we're prepared for that when we go into parenting. So it's like, I'm learning to respect you, even though this is imbalanced. And there's kind of an understanding that in adult relationships, it should be balanced, but the parent-child relationship is so very imbalanced. The amount that they need us in relationship to how much we need them, it's not balanced. And so teaching adults how do I still get those needs met outside of the parent-child relationship so that I can show up respectfully to this clearly imbalanced relationship. And a lot of times society doesn't tell us that that's the healthy thing to do, to like prioritize getting our needs met. But we're going to do it regardless. Like either we're going to do it in a healthy way outside of the parent-child relationship, or we're going to do that with our kids and we're going to get our emotional needs met through how we treat them or how we don't treat them. Like it's going to happen regardless. So the empowerment piece is, how about we get ahead of that and we sturdy ourselves a little bit to say, yeah, I actually can't play tonight. Like that doesn't make sense in the big scheme of things. Or you know what, I'm going to stand on this no, because I need to say that in order to function properly. And it's not going to cause harm just because somebody on Instagram said that it's going to cause harm for me, for my kid to hear the word no. You know, I think that's really important because it is imbalanced, but we have to find that balance outside of forcing our kids, because then that's when it flips and that's when it's disorganized. And now they're walking on eggshells to meet our needs in order for them to be safe.
One of the things I'm struggling with now, like I said, my son's almost 11, is you mentioned this word of disrespect before, which sometimes it's overt. Sometimes it's, I hate you or whatever, dad, that's outright disrespect. But a lot of times for me, I'm assigning a certain level of conscious disrespect to things that I think he's not realizing are disrespectful. He's just being a kid, and I want to give him the benefit of being an evolved, very mature 10-year-old and say, listen, when I ask you to put this glass away, or when I ask you to clean up your room, or I ask you to, and you don't do it, that shows me that dad's words don't matter. That shows me that you don't value, hey, I want to do this for dad because it's important to him. And that feels like disrespect to me. And I'm finding it difficult to balance that of giving him a little bit more leeway of like, he's just being a kid. He's not making a conscious choice to be like, I'm not going to clean my room because I'm going to show dad that I don't respect him. I think there's this fine line, especially with tweens, where he's approaching, where I do have to be on the lookout for when it is a conscious choice, where he's manipulating me, or he's, because I do feel like that's happening now, where he knows if he just hangs in there long enough, I'm going to go, fine, whatever, fine, go play. I don't care. Play video games. I give up, because he knows if he just hangs on long enough. But I don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's like, oh, I got dad tied around my little finger. But it is. It's walking that line of like, I want him to know that these things are important to me. But when he doesn't do them, that I can't be so hurt and offended. Like, how dare you disrespect your father? I am the voice. It's like finding that balance is tough for me now. And as, like I said, as his dynamic changes, getting older, starting to be a tween, I'm not sure how I'm going to navigate that, because I'm not doing it very well now. And it hasn't even gotten to the point where he's a snarky, disaffected teen yet. So I weep for the future.
Yeah, I mean, we're totally in that space, but at the same time, what you're feeling is like valid, like for you to take that personal and for you to recognize that that's what you're doing. Does it at all change your behavior with him, or is it just something that you notice? Like, I'm irritated.
It depends. Yeah, I mean, on the days where I'm not mindful and I do not have the ability to step back and be like, okay, he's just, he just wants to play with his friends, or he just wants to do that. There are times when I snap, or there are times when I get really offended and really hurt. And then he gets hurt that I go, I guess this wasn't important to you. I guess, what dad wants doesn't matter. And then he's like, oh, Dad, no, like, don't say that. And then I feel bad that I've manipulated him into like guilt. I'm like guilting him. So yeah, there are times when I handle it better than others, but I don't always know what the right thing to do is in those moments.
So in those moments for me, when I don't necessarily quote unquote know what the right thing to do is, I think that the powerful part about them being tweens is that communication is a little bit more fluid, and it's a little bit, we have access to more. And so I would just say that. You're saying something, so I would just say that. Like, the story that I'm telling myself is that you don't care. I know that that's not true, but I'm taking this personal. How can we fix this? How can I support you? What are you needing? What is happening? What is the reason why it's not getting done? Because I know the reason isn't that you don't respect me, but that's how I'm feeling. Like, I will sportscast what's happening for me.
Okay.
Because I know that as a human, that's just realistic. Like, it's just what happens when you're in community with someone. And so we have this option of, I need to figure out how to always give my child generous assumptions. I'm never going to be there. I'm never going to be there with any human, but I can be honest about what's happening in my internal experience and teach my child what it looks like to not just be curious about somebody else's experience, but to be curious about mine. So
still give voice to that impulse, but do it as less of a statement of fact that you are disrespecting me, and take more ownership of it and be like, when you do that, I know you're not doing it to be disrespectful, but that's how it hits me, and that's how it makes me feel. And so I have a lot of trouble processing that in that moment, and maybe give him the opportunity to be like, oh, I didn't realize that me not putting the glass away hurt you as much as it does. It shouldn't. It's just a dumb thing. And I go, yeah, but it's the bigger picture. And it's so, okay.
Well, that's what it means to be in community with people. And I see like my home as a community. And so as they get older, I'm giving voice to my needs, but I'm owning them as needs. Like, there's nothing wrong with you desiring a clean space. That's something you value. That's something that's important to you, and you're in community with other people. And so if he's at a place developmentally where you are supporting each other in your needs, there's nothing wrong with expressing that, but I'm all about owning my needs. And I think that when we don't have that conversation, it becomes right and wrong. It becomes good and bad, versus you're getting to an age where your values look different than mine.
Yeah.
Your preferences look different than mine. Your priorities look different than mine. And so it keeps me in a state of not being permissive, because if I'm giving you generous assumptions to the point where now my needs don't matter, and you're getting older, that's not going to create the kind of relationship that I desire for us either. So it becomes a matter of me being able to express my needs in a way that I'm owning them. I'm owning my feelings. And when I do that, when I articulate that, now whatever behavior follows is coming from a much more logical and rational space and place. So I personally say out loud what is happening, what my internal experience is when I'm getting frustrated, when I'm getting sad, when I'm getting angry.
Ryan, let me continue on this, just because the next logical question is, when we've done that, because I think there are times when I have been pretty clear and concise in that, and the behavior still doesn't change.
In that moment.
Or not even in the moment, but just the next time. Like, there are things that we have said 100 times, and I go, I've tried discipline, I've tried anger, and I've tried, like, hey, listen, it's not about that right and wrong, it's about that this feels disrespectful, whatever. I still, like, I've come to the end of my toolbox where I go, I don't know what else to try to get through to him about this particular thing, because we've said it 1,000 times and he still doesn't do it. Like, I don't know what to do then when I'm out of tactics.
So the same way that I would approach any pattern, going back to that, is it a lack of awareness? Is it a lack of tool, or is it a lack of support? So I will ask you that specific behavior. If you were looking at it, is it a lack of his awareness and understanding of the implications of the behavior? Is it that he hasn't developed a certain tool or skill set around the behavior? Or is there not enough scaffolding and support in terms of boundaries or environment or your willingness to help support that habit or behavior? Where do you think he's at on that continuum?
See, I don't know. I mean, if I were to pick a specific infraction that we're talking about, we're at the age where he can clear the table after dinner, and sometimes I'll come out after he's gone to school, and there's a plate in the sink with pancake syrup on it, and I go, please rinse the plate and put it in the dish. It's like just stuff like that where I don't know what I've not done well enough to reinforce it in his mind, because it still happens. You know what I mean? So I don't know how to answer that. I can't honestly look back and say this is a deficiency or something that I have, because I feel like I've tried every different tactic to get him to remember that.
Well, if it is awareness, it is an awareness thing, and maybe he doesn't see the value in it the same way that you see the value in it. What does that mean? What does that mean in your mind? What does that mean for him as a person?
Honestly, it just means for me. It means that he knows that dad's or mom is just going to do it, so it'll eventually get done. It's not important to him. What does he care if the plate gets clean? He's just going to get a clean plate given to him tomorrow. You know what I mean? There's no impetus for him to get a clean plate, because it's not like I'm going to serve him breakfast on the dirty plate to teach him a lesson like our parents would have done or something. You know what I mean?
Okay. And so then that, in my opinion, goes to the other end of it, which is the support piece of it, is that if within the environment there is not a supportive measure that lends to this habit being developed, then it probably would be significantly difficult for him to create that internalized structure to be able to do it. If he knows the plate's going to get washed and I'm going to get another plate, and it's not something that he values, not something he understands, it sounds like you've given him the tools to be able to do it.
Right.
But maybe the understanding and the value of that is not there. And the support in the environment, like, hey, no, I'm actually not going to wash this plate. You're going to wash the plate, is not there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what would that look like? And is that even something that's genuinely that important to you?
No, it isn't that important in that moment. And for me, I am definitely a big picture guy. And even with my wife, the arguments that we have, I'm always saying, like, it's not about the shirt. It's not about the thing. It's about the bigger picture of you hearing me or you understanding what's important to me. I'm always about the big picture. And I think maybe that's the problem, is that a 10-year-old mind doesn't think in the grand scheme of I'm 47 and I command respect. It's like, it's just a plate, or it's just, I didn't finish this part of my homework. It's fine. I get that a lot. It's fine. Dad, it's fine. It's fine. I'm like, it's not fine. So I think there is just a disconnect in terms of what's important to him versus what's important to me. And for me, I've always been about, like, the injustice if I was on the subway in New York and somebody was holding the door, I'd be like, you are making everyone on this train wait. That is injustice. And other people are like, whatever, get over it. So I'm sure I'm probably too far in this direction, and he's maybe a little lower, but probably not for his age. He's probably right where he should be. And maybe I just have to lower my expectations a little bit. That sounds like giving up to me.
But the cool part about that is that you have the framework and the understanding to say that this is like a personality quirk thing for me, and that where this is really coming from is like my desire to have a sense of control.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just from having my therapist hat on, looking at you telling this story, Doc. I can see how it makes you feel kind of defeated. You kind of like almost are sinking down as you're telling it, and with the feeling that I'm getting is that as much as it is wanting him to grow and to become more responsible, you're feeling like it's your failing in some way. You're taking it very personally as something that, what am I doing wrong? And
why can I not get through to him? Yeah.
Right. And so to me, like, that's as much work for yourself to do as it is in terms of your parenting style, because I would imagine, not even consciously, he's picking up on that in you in the way that I am right now as you're telling the story. And so if he's seeing that sort of pain that you're experiencing in, like, well, how am I failing in this way? And then, like, how am I going to fix this? And you're kind of projecting it onto him as this is a problem that's a him problem and not a you problem. Mm-hmm. Then he's probably more likely to disengage. It's just kind of like, well, this isn't my issue. This is Dad's issue.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, as a therapist, obviously I would work with you in a different capacity, but Destini, you being the parenting coach, how does he do that work? How does he kind of get to a place where that's not showing up in his parenting because he's able to, because it's not just about getting consistent with your values, which it sounds like you are, Doc. It's also about knowing what our triggers are, knowing what the things are that are going to get under our skin, because it's not how we respond when things are going great. It's how we react when things aren't going great. So you want to shift out of reaction where your emotions are involved. You're coming from a place of hurt and now overcompensating in some way. You want to find that you're coming from an authentic place that's consistent with what is whole to you and not wounded.
Right. Destiny, I wanted to ask you about the parenting and the pause as
I was
the
literally
concept.
just about to come
please.
to that is typically what the response is that we're dissecting an actual instance. And so you can get into that space and understand what was the trigger, what was the thought that I was having before my response and before my reaction. Because once you've gone through the values and you're like, I'm in alignment, there's something happening in this moment that I'm taking personally, and it's making me act outside of my values in these very specific moments. And so I would walk you through that situation. You come up to the sink and you've already asked, and you see that the glass is not washed. I'm hearing from you, there's a sense of, why is he not listening? There's a sense of injustice. I'd imagine there's also a sense of, I do so much. I asked you to do this one little thing. And so allowing you to get more familiar with that thought process, also some somatic stuff, understanding what's happening in your body in those moments, because it sounds like I'm never in the camp of trying to get parents to do something that they don't think that they should do. It sounds like you don't want this to be something that's bothering you. So rather than focusing on his behavior, I would say in that moment, understanding what you're needing to get out of that distorted thinking, what you're needing to get out of what is really triggering and happening in your body. And you're going to be able to respond in that moment the way that you would any other time, in alignment with your values. And so just becoming more familiar with the tiny little pause of a triggered moment and what's actually happening, allowing my clients to kind of be the fly on the wall and to watch, like Ryan said, to watch you shrink and to be able to bring your power back up in that moment, to watch how your voice changes, to see those similar thoughts that come up every single time you address this, and to give it a new narrative and to give it a new conversation, I think is really important.
Yeah, because for me, I do find myself always kind of likening it to like, well, but when you have a job, your boss is not going to want to hear it's fine. And when you have a wife or a husband, you're not going to want to hear, oh, it's fine. The plate will get, like, I always am trying to impart the bigger picture to him of like, the reason I'm so hard on you about a stupid plate with syrup on it is because I need you to apply that same sense of, hey, this is what has to get done to your homework. A lot of times the question on homework will be like, how would you explain this to Susie? And why would you do it that way? And he'll answer the first part, but not the second part. And I'll be like, but you have to follow the full instruction, So it's like, I always am thinking, this is my job as a parent to prepare you for life. And so like Mr. Miyagi, I may be teaching you to wax the car, but I'm actually teaching you how to block punches and kicks. So if I'm teaching you to wash a plate, I'm actually teaching you how to complete a job, a task that your manager has given you at work so you can excel. And maybe I'm just assigning, I am assigning way too much.
That's important though. And that's what we're here for, to do is to teach. And so understanding what does being hard on him actually look like in a healthy way for you. And if you were saying, okay, this is how I genuinely would like to have approached that situation. This is how I would have liked to approach the cup, making sure that he still got it cleaned, but you also have expressed nurturing being important to you. If you could really paint that picture of what that moment looks like, and understanding how, when you saw the cup, that triggered moment blocked you from being able to do that.
Yeah.
That's what's important. It's not about, you don't even have to back down from that. You don't have to be like, well, maybe I'm thinking too big picture. Like, yeah, you don't want him to be that way in a relationship and with his boss. And that's why he's such a great kid right now.
Right. Because
of the things that you're implementing and teaching him. It's about making sure that when you're teaching that, you're showing up without the trigger. And so pausing first. And it's so special that you know that this is a thing for you because you have the self-awareness piece. So that's a muscle. Like I'm sure Ryan would tell you, and with your clients, like awareness is a muscle. And the more that you do it, the more that you're able to make more conscious decisions. And sometimes people think it's like this magical person that's going to step in. It's like, no, you're going to step in when you're more present and when you're more aware of these things. And you actually know what to do when you step in. This is just one of those things in parenting that maybe you haven't had as much awareness around. But it sounds like you have so many things that you do, and that's why he's such a great kid.
Just trying to find the way to appeal to him. Like, okay, now that I've come to a place of calmness and stuff, still trying to figure out what's the approach that's going to get him the next time to go, oh yeah, Dad said this was important to him, or oh yeah, Dad's going to take away video games, or oh yeah, I'm like, I don't know still. Sorry, I'm sorry we've spent so much time on the plate.
No,
but I think it's a great metaphor for.
I do want to ask you one question though,
sure,
before
and then we can move
past that. If the next time, like if you had a great experience and you did it, you played it out just how you wanted to, and he washed the cup.
Yeah.
If the next time he all of a sudden is not like, I get it, I'm going to do it.
I'm already angry, but yeah, go ahead.
What would it mean to lean into the fact that, okay, if I'm already angry, that means that I'm still supposed to be going inward. And it doesn't mean that anything about him because he hasn't gotten this skill or this habit right away, a year from now, 2 years from now. Mm-hmm. If he genuinely never did, wouldn't you be more, or would you be willing to look at how that's still something that's triggering you? And if it is genuinely something, again, going back to the beginning, that you value, or if it's deeper than that? Does his behavior need to change in order for how you see the behavior to change?
Do you mean, could I learn to just accept that maybe he'll just never be a kid who's going to wash his own plate? Like, I just have to be okay with that?
No. That's definitely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, no. What I'm saying is, are you willing to accept your role in it the next time and not have the expectation of, I did all the things right and he still didn't wash the cup? Because that's the tricky part.
Yeah, I'd be willing to accept it. Excuse me, but I guess my questions would still remain in terms of like, well, then if that didn't work, what else is left in terms of I've tried all these other things and now I'm trying this mindful approach of getting out of that moment of reaction and getting into, and if that didn't work, I don't know what else I would do. I feel like I was at the end of my rope,
One of the things I work on with my couples clients and with my individual clients when they're talking about relationships is that, essentially we don't have, as much as we'd like to, we don't have any control over other people, right? We only have control over ourselves. And a kid is included in that. No matter how much they are dependent on you and you are responsible for them and you have authority over them, they're still an autonomous being who you can't reach into their mind and make them do what you want them to do. You can't reach into
the way I feel.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't reach into their heart and make them feel the way you feel. So we work a lot in terms of relationship, in terms of acceptance of that, and just keeping your side of the street clean is a phrase I use a lot. Now the sort of irony though is that while we don't have a lot of control over other people, by exerting control over ourselves, by keeping our side of the street clean, by showing up the way that we would like them to show up, by modeling the behavior that we would like to see in them, that's actually the greatest effect we tend to have on people in relationship.
But that's just me washing the plate, isn't it?
No. Well, what I'm saying is like your frustration level, the fact that you're taking it so personally, and this isn't judgment on you, this is just observation.
Yeah.
You're taking it personally. It's making it a you thing and not, this is a plate thing. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So you're showing up in a way that you've already moved what the thing is off of the thing onto you. Mm-hmm. It's about you and your feelings now, right? And so when I show up in a relationship, and I love what you said, Destini, about, calling it out for what it is. I'm feeling this. So now that's what I'm feeling because of this situation. That could be my stuff. That could be my trigger. This is what I'm projecting onto it. But I just want you to know that this is what's occurring right now, because what we're both trying to achieve here is that this situation gets resolved in a way that both of us are happy.
Right.
Like we both want the same outcome. He might have a different idea as to what that what happy would mean. He doesn't want to wash his plate. You have a different idea of what happy would be. He does wash his plate. However, you're getting upset about it, and it's bringing up all this other stuff about injustice about failure and about, you know, he's going to have problems 20 years from now
because he didn't wash
the plate.
Yeah.
And so it's about, to me, body language is so important. Showing up, you talk about somatically and your nervous system. I just get a sense, and I could be wrong, but that if you're showing up in a way that you're modeling kind of like, well, this is what's going to happen. You're going to clean the plate. You know, there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. I'm going to stand here until you do it. And it doesn't affect me at all. I'm not going to get hurt by the fact that you don't want to do it. It's not a failing on my part. This isn't injustice. This is a 12-year-old who's, you know, doesn't want to clean a plate. That's all that it is. It's age appropriate, right? But I'm going to stand here until it gets resolved because that's my job right now. And there's no feelings anymore. It's just I'm showing up as the parent, as the calm, centered, balanced, embodied, authentic parent who is going to resolve this situation in a really calm, healthy way. Does that work? I don't know.
To Ryan's point, you're only able to do that, to have that steadiness, that consistency that makes habit change easier, if it's not an actual triggering event, if it doesn't have that same emotional charge. And so if we're still coming back to it and still emotionally charged, for me as the coach, I'd be like, that's most important right now. That is so much more important than the behavior, because you cannot teach them a habit in your most effective way if that thing has such a triggered response. And I'm also acknowledging and aware of, what else am I teaching my child? Yeah, like if he does wash the cup and then it becomes consistent, did I like teach him that if I tantrum, like if somebody tantrums enough that you should meet their needs? Or like, you know what I'm saying? In a relationship, in community, are we just supposed to meet people's needs because it's their need? Like, is that really genuinely, or even just because they wanted us to do it, is that genuinely what community and relationship looks like? Because somebody asks me to do it every day, I should do it, versus understanding, oh, I'm in community with this person. We do things for each other. I may not do it right this second, but I'm going to do, like, you open up that conversation, but you can't do that if you're just looking at it as the plate when there's so many other things really going on.
Understood. Thank you very much. It's very insightful, and it's definitely going to give me, I will try to apply that literally the next time this happens, which will probably be tonight after dinner. I'll let you know how it goes.
It's going to happen. Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
So last topic I just wanted to bring up with you. You mentioned earlier, Destini, ADHD and how that affects you as a parent. And there's some history there. I know that as a kid, whether because you had ADHD or ADHD being the result, you were labeled as sort of the bad kid or the black sheep, the problem child. And so I'm just curious how that, your identity at that age and your identity as a parent, how that, I know that you were diagnosed later in life. How did that affect things for you as a parent?
Well, I'll start with, as a child, I think that sometimes when you're parenting the quote unquote bad child, there really is a mix between authoritarian and neglectful, because it's kind of just like, I'm going to stay hands off because I don't want to deal with that kid. Like, it's just too much work. So I figured out a lot of things on my own. I had to learn a lot of things on my own. I was alone by myself. But then the other side of that is when I finally do step in as a parent, things have gotten so out of control that all I know how to do is yell or spank. So I really had like very opposite ends of that spectrum. And so being able to have a balanced approach was something that was very difficult for me, but something that's really important. I'm really big on like not labeling because of that, and being able to have generous assumptions. Understanding child development has been something that's really important to me. I think that it should just be standard for parents, because a lot of things that we think are disrespectful are really just inconvenient behaviors that humans are supposed to have. They're just not convenient for us. And so that has been really important to me as someone who was late diagnosed. I'm also really intentional about like curating my environment and having systems and not having shame, because I've had shame my entire life around ADHD behaviors without the actual diagnosis. And so when I got the support of therapy and the support of medication, I'm like, how can I create those kind of systems and supports in my environment so that I can thrive best? And I'm very intentional about that with my kids. Like, I'm going to meet you where you are. My brain developed differently because I have ADHD. Your brain is different because you're a kid. And so I'm very big on, we're doing the thing. How can I support you? And as a kid, it was either you don't have to do the thing because I don't want to support you because it'd be too much work. So you just don't have to do it. Or I'm going to force you to do it and figure it out on your own. And so in my parenting, scaffolding and like holding my children up to their highest to be able to do things is really, really important to me. Like, we're doing the thing. We are going to do the thing. How can I support you? What do you need? How can you support yourself? Because I didn't have that. And because I see how major that is as an adult with somebody, as an adult with ADHD.
Sidebar on that. Something I want to mention is that I can't stand the sentiment that we hear today of like, oh, everybody today is ADHD. And when we were kids, we all would have been. It's so dismissive of an actual clinical diagnosis and things that are so helpful in finding the right way to set up our kids for success. I just let's all take that out of our lexicon, listeners. Like the whole like, yeah, we were all ADHD back in the day. No, we weren't. Some kids were, some kids weren't, some kids were on the spectrum. And that's great. That's not a bad thing. It's not we all get a first place trophy mentality.
I'm like, I actually don't want it. I don't want it. It is actually debilitating.
It infuriates me every time I hear people dismissively throw out like, oh, we were all ADHD or everyone was hyper. Like, it's not true. Let's put some respect on the name of the people who are dealing with this and overcoming those obstacles. So sorry. Now we can move on.
That's a really important thing to say. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, everything is on a spectrum, right? I mean, we now are talking about autism on a spectrum, but if you open up the DSM, like every diagnosis is really on a spectrum. Right. And it's like, yes, it is age appropriate for kids to have a short attention span. Like that's normal. And all kids have that to a certain extent. It is hard to get them to sit down and focus, but not all kids have a disorder. Right. Yeah. So every time you see a kid who's showing up that is kind of all over the place, they can't focus, it doesn't mean that they have ADHD. And it diminishes the diagnosis for somebody who really is struggling with something that goes to the higher range of that spectrum and has a different kind of needs that are required to deal with that. And it's what's also helped me in terms of my understanding of ADHD, because I'll admit I've had my own stigma attached to that diagnosis because I've dealt with a few people in my life that had pretty severe ADHD. And as somebody who has OCD and is very sort of anal and perfectionistic and type A, I found it very frustrating. Yeah. But as a professional, as I've had to work with a lot of people, obviously, that have that diagnosis, I've been looking at it through a more trauma-informed lens and looking at what, just very empathically, what is their experience? Like, why are these symptoms manifesting? And very similar to the conversation we were just having, Duck, it's like, I'm taking it very personally when somebody is not able to show up in the way that I would like them to show up. And so I think that when you're talking about dealing with a kid, and correct me if I'm wrong, Destini, if you have a kid that is diagnosed with ADHD and you're coming to them expecting them to show up in a way that as a kid that doesn't have ADHD, you're projecting your own needs and your own expectations, and you're going to end up getting frustrated and disappointed and take things personally, much more so than if you didn't have that expectation.
Yeah. And not only that, but that's going to impact their own self-image and how they show up with themselves. And that's just going to lead to more maladaptive behaviors. Speaking for myself, I know that a lot of research now is speaking on the trauma component element, and I can't personally speak to that. But I do know that in my own life, there was a trauma element there, and I can't pinpoint when certain behaviors started versus when they didn't. I know that my environment was very disorganized. And so, yes, there is a biological piece to it, but I do know that there's also a behavioral and environmental element. I can just say that now because when my environment looks a certain way, my ADHD looks a certain way, medicated or not, therapy or not, versus the opposite. And so I appreciate where the research is going. And at the same time, I know that adults like me and parents are just like, yeah, but do the interventions help? Yes or no? And so that's kind of where I see it in the landscape of like, curating your life, your community, your systems in a way that are supporting you, and not so much finger pointing and judgment and labeling the individual with ADHD themselves.
Right.
One of the parallels I drew early on in our, I think our first conversation, Ryan, on our first episode together, was I'm my son's Little League coach. And I said it then, I'll say it now. My son is not going to go to the majors. He's not a natural gifted baseball player. But I've been his coach for 6 seasons now. And for the first few years, I was like very frustrated, like, oh, I wish he would get his elbow up. I wish he'd drive. And when I stopped trying to coach him into the player I thought he should be, and I started embracing the player that he was and the things that he was good at and the things that he just did naturally, our entire dynamic changed. We used to fight after practice, and I was mean to him. He felt I was being mean to him. And my entire outlook changed when I stopped trying to make him into the player that I thought he should be, and which just started embracing the player that he was. And I think that's a one-to-one comparison to stop wanting your child to do the things the way that you do them or the way it's important to you, and find a common ground where you can find the way that he or she needs to do it. The way that they approach things might be different than yours. And if you can find a common ground, a common language, like you said, like Ryan, like you said, the end result is you all end up happy. You all end up with what you wanted, rather than one party is disappointed because they didn't do it the way you wanted, or it wasn't as important to them as you think it should be.
I love that. And just to your point, I think that oftentimes when we're in our like grown-upness, the way that kids are doing things sometimes are like the more fluid, the more feel good, the more present way of doing things. And so I think that that's one of the most amazing things about having kids, and me having ADHD, like having children that do not give a crap about time, not like me being able to like lean into like, it is okay that we're dancing and brushing our teeth. Like I had to mask for years, and now I have children that are like, it's just, I'm a single parent, so I got to have another adult that I'm annoying. So it is really nice for me to lean into the parts that are like, no, actually, I know it's midnight, but it's summertime, and we're just going to like hyper focus on this K-pop band, and we're going to stay up all night and like geek out about it. Being able to do that, I think, is like a gift. And that's something that I do appreciate about me having ADHD, is that because I've set up my life in a way, and I try to consistently set it up in a way, I don't always have to be masking in my parenting or in my life.
Yeah, they don't know that they're doing it wrong, and in that freedom, they end up finding maybe a more efficient way, or just a happier way to do things, like you say.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Destiny, I feel like I could talk to you for probably another hour.
I got 10 more questions, about 10 more.
Let's take it on the road.
It's so helpful, and it's been a pleasure. I enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I'm going to definitely, keep up with the things you're doing. I hope that our paths cross again. Maybe there's a part 2 at some point. That would be lovely.
Same. Absolutely. I gotta get the part 2 on this cup.
Where can our listeners follow you and help get the benefit of your insight and all your socials and stuff?
I am Destini Ann on all of the socials and website as well. Destini Ann.
Well, that's simple. You must have gotten in early. Nice.
I did.
Excellent. All right. Destini Ann Davis, thank you so much for being a guest on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes, and we'll have hopefully some more conversations that are in the ballpark of this, because this was fabulous. We'll see you next time on the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Bye.